Have you ever imagined living alone for so long, to the point where any company seems like a miracle, even if that company hides something that doesn't belong to this world? She just wanted company, but she was harboring something that wasn't even from this world. In a simple house, forgotten by time and the rest of the world, lived an elderly woman who no longer expected anything from life. The days were long and silent, and the nights even worse. No visits, no calls, no sign that anyone still cared. Only the sound of the wind rustling through the windows and the echo of her own thoughts. Until one seemingly ordinary night, everything changed. That's when that cat appeared. Small, dirty, with a different look. Too intense for an ordinary animal. He didn't meow like the others, he didn't behave like the others, and yet, he chose to stay. Or perhaps, he chose her. At first, it seemed like just luck. A little companionship to break the emptiness. Something to care for, to love, to give meaning to days that were once so monotonous. And for a moment, everything really did seem to improve. But then, strange things started to happen. Have you ever had that feeling that something is wrong, even without being able to explain why? The cat would disappear during the night. It would simply vanish and return as if nothing had happened. Sometimes it would stand still, staring at a corner of the house, completely motionless, as if it were seeing something that wasn't there, or that perhaps only it could see. And the most unsettling thing was the look in his eyes. It wasn't an ordinary look. It was as if that cat understood everything, as if it were observing, waiting, calculating. What you are about to discover may surprise you, because as the days went by, the elderly woman began to realize that it wasn't just the cat's behavior that was different. Lights were flickering for no reason. Strange sounds were emerging in the middle of the night, and a constant feeling that there was something more in that house. Something invisible. Something is watching. Something is waiting for the right moment. And then comes the question that changes everything. Why would an entity from another world travel across galaxies? Just for a simple cat? Stay with me until the end, because what seems like just a story of loneliness and companionship may hide something much bigger, something that goes beyond our understanding, beyond Earth, beyond what we believe to be real. Because this is not just the story of an elderly woman and her cat. It's the beginning of a mystery involving unknown forces, hidden secrets, and a truth that should never have been discovered. And it all begins with something simple, but that is about to reveal the impossible. And perhaps as you listen to this story, a question will begin to arise within you as well. What if it wasn't just a story? What if, at some point in your life, you also felt that something wasn't right, even without being able to explain it? Because the truth is, there are things we feel even before we understand them. Strange sensations, silent presences, small details that seem insignificant until they cease to be. That old woman began to realize this in the worst way. At first, she tried to ignore it. She told herself it was just tiredness, loneliness, maybe something that comes with age. But deep down, very deep down, she knew it wasn't just that. There was something different about that cat. Something that couldn't be explained with logic or reason. And this is exactly where I want to hear from you. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has resonated with you the most so far. Have you ever experienced something strange like this? Have you ever felt that there was something beyond what the eyes could see? Or do you think there's a simple explanation for all of this? Your experience may seem small, but it can help someone who is watching now and silently, feeling the same thing. And if this story has already captivated you in some way, click the like button. It may seem simple, but it shows that this type of content needs to continue to exist. That's how more people find stories like this. Stories that make us feel, think, and even question what is real. And if you want to keep up with this kind of story, full of mystery, emotion, plot twists, and revelations that go beyond the ordinary, subscribe to the channel, because your participation here isn't just a click. It's what makes this channel grow, reach more people, and continue bringing stories that, in some way, can touch something inside those who watch. And now tell me, would you trust this cat, or was he already afraid of what he really is? Because while you were thinking about it, in that quiet house something was starting to intensify, and this time, there was no way to ignore it anymore. Her house was at the end of a nearly forgotten street, where movement was so rare that any unusual noise felt like an event. The walls bore the marks of time. The gate creaked as if complaining every time it opened, and inside, everything remained the same. Days that began without expectation and ended the same way. No news, no visitors, no one to share even a simple conversation with. Her routine was silent, repetitive, and, little by little, that shapes anyone's mindset. It's not just loneliness. It's the feeling of being erased from the world, as if your existence no longer has any impact. And perhaps you understand this better than you imagine. She would wake up early, make a simple coffee, sit at the table and stay there for a few minutes staring into nothingness, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't have much else to do. The days were too long when there's no purpose, when there's no exchange, when there's no one who notices your presence. And it was precisely in this scenario that something unexpected happened. On a cloudy afternoon, while the wind blew stronger than usual, she heard a different sound outside. A low meow, faint, almost like a cry for help. At first she hesitated. She no longer had the energy for surprises, much less for problems. But something inside her, perhaps that part that still sought meaning, made her get up. When she opened the door, he was there. Small, dirty, hurt. But what was most striking wasn't his condition. It was his gaze. It wasn't the ordinary look of a frightened animal. It was too deep, too fixed, as if it were assessing, as if it were recognizing that place or even her. For a moment, the two stood motionless, looking at each other, in silence. And then, without any effort, without asking permission, the cat came in, as if he already knew that was his place. She tried to understand it, but quickly gave up. Sometimes we don't need immediate answers. We just need something to fill the void. And at that moment, that cat represented exactly that. In the following days, something began to change, subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. Her routine took on small variations. She started talking more, even if it was just to her cat. She prepared food, thinking about sharing it. She sat in silence for less time, and for the first time in a long time, she began to feel that she wasn't completely alone. This may seem simple, but it's a profound transformation, because it's not just about having company. It's about feeling present in the world again, about recovering, even if gradually, a sense of purpose. The cat began to follow her around the house, lie down near her, observe her with that same intensity which, while comforting, also caused a certain discomfort that was difficult to explain. It was as if he were always attentive, always aware of something beyond. But even so, she clung on. She created little rituals. She would talk to him while tidying the house, complain about her day, recount old memories, as if he truly understood every word. And perhaps in some way, he did understand. Because his behavior was unusual, he showed no fear. He wasn't startled by noises. He didn't react like a normal animal would. On the contrary, he always seemed in control, always observing, always present in a way that didn't match something so small and seemingly fragile. And yet, he allowed himself to be taken care of. He slept near her, accepted affection, remained there, as if he too were fulfilling some kind of silent journey, as if that coexistence had a greater purpose, hidden behind it all. And this is where everything starts to take on a new significance, because the more she connected with that cat, the harder it would be to accept the truth behind it. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what seemed like just an unexpected encounter, almost a twist of fate, was actually beginning to reveal much more complex layers, invisible decisions, paths that were already being traced, and a hidden truth that was still far from being understood. And perhaps without realizing it, she had already embarked on a journey from which there would be no turning back, a journey where every detail mattered, every glance, every silence, every absence. And if you feel there's something in this story that goes beyond what it seems, comment below. That makes sense to me. And it was precisely when everything seemed to have found a certain balance that the first signs began to emerge. At first, they were such small details that anyone would ignore them, things that in isolation meant nothing. But when they started to repeat themselves, they began to carry a different weight. The cat, which used to always stay nearby, began to disappear at night. It wasn't something gradual. It simply happened. She would bring him inside, lock the house as she always did, and when she realized it, he was no longer there. No noise, no open door, no logical explanation. And the strangest thing is that he always returned before dawn, as if nothing had happened, as if he had never left. At first she tried to rationalize it. She thought maybe she was forgetting to close a window. That age might be affecting her attention, but deep down, there was a feeling that didn't fit into any simple explanation. Have you ever felt that way? When your mind tries to find answers, but something inside you tells you it's not quite like that? And it wasn't, because in addition to the disappearances, his behavior began to change in an even more disturbing way. The cat began to remain completely still for long periods, staring intently at empty spots in the house. It wasn't distraction, nor ordinary curiosity. It was attention. It was focus. It was as if he were observing something that simply wasn't there, at least not to her, and sometimes he would react. His eyes followed invisible movements, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to something in the distance, and at certain moments, his body stiffened, as if he were facing a presence she couldn't see. These events began to affect the environment in a way that she could no longer ignore. The house lights started flickering for no reason. It wasn't frequent enough to be considered an electrical problem, but it also wasn't rare enough to be a coincidence. The television would turn itself off. Small noises would appear during the early morning hours. Light footsteps, almost imperceptible, but present. And the silence, it was no longer the same. It was a heavy silence, dense, as if something were there, filling the space between one sound and another. But what really began to shake her perception were the dreams. At first, they were disconnected fragments, loose images, difficult to remember upon waking. But as the days passed, these dreams began to take shape, clarity, intensity. She saw strange lights in the sky, shapes she couldn't describe. She felt as if she were being watched, not from afar, but up close, very close. And in all those dreams, the cat was present, always watching, always at the center of everything, as if he were more than just a spectator, as if it were part of it. Upon waking, her heart racing, her breathing heavy, she looked around trying to reconnect with reality, but something had already changed within her. Because when the mind begins to question what is real, nothing is ever the same again. The feeling of control begins to fade, and it is at this point that the decisions begin to weigh heavily. Ignore, confront, run away. She tried to carry on as if nothing was happening. She continued feeding the cat, maintaining her routine, repeating the same habits, but now everything seemed different. Every movement of his was observed more closely, every silence interpreted in a different way. And the more attention she paid, the more she realized that this cat wasn't just reacting to its environment. He anticipated it. He seemed to know when something was going to happen. Before the lights even flickered, he was already looking up. Before the noises even started, he was already alert. Even before she felt fear, he was already prepared. And that changes everything, because it's no longer just strange behavior. It's a matter of awareness. It's about something you understand, something you perceive, something that might be connected to something bigger, outside of that space, outside of that common reality. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when these signs cease to be isolated and begin to form a pattern, the story stops being merely strange. It begins to reveal behind-the-scenes events that should never have come to light. A sequence of events that are not random, but part of something much larger. And it is precisely at this moment that the truth begins to draw closer, even if it is still hidden. And when she finally reveals herself, there's no going back. If you also feel there's something more to it than what's being shown here, write it down. Something is wrong here. And that's when what had previously seemed merely strange ceased to be a doubt and became a reality. That night, the air felt different. It wasn't just the silence. It was something denser, almost palpable, as if the very atmosphere was charged with an energy that didn't belong there. The old woman felt it even before anything happened. A slight discomfort in her chest, an unease that had no explanation, but that also couldn't be ignored. The cat was no longer as relaxed as before. He was alert, standing in the middle of the room, his eyes fixed on the door, as if he knew exactly what was about to happen. And then came the sound, a low, vibrant noise, unlike anything she had ever heard. It didn't seem to come from outside, nor from within. It was as if it passed through the walls, as if it were everywhere at once. A sound that wasn't just heard, it was felt. The lights began to flicker, once, twice, 3 times, until they faded completely. For a few seconds, everything was plunged into darkness. And it was in this absolute silence that the light appeared. Not an ordinary light. It was intense, but not blinding. Strong, but it didn't illuminate as it should. It was as if it had a life of its own, as if it didn't obey the rules of the world she knew. The old woman stepped back, heart racing, hands trembling, trying to understand what was happening, mind searching for answers, but there wasn't enough logic to explain it. And the cat didn't move. He just watched, as if he were waiting, as if that was inevitable. And then the presence revealed itself. In the midst of that light, a form began to emerge. It wasn't human, but it wasn't something completely alien either. There was a structure, an intention, a clear consciousness there. The alien. She wasn't walking. She wasn't making a sound. She was just there, as if she had crossed something that separated her from that place. And the most disturbing thing, the reason is that she didn't. Look at the old woman. From the very first moment, her focus was on the cat, as if the elderly woman's existence were irrelevant, as if she wasn't even there. The elderly woman tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Her body wouldn't respond. It was as if that presence had a direct impact on her ability to react. And then, the voice came, but not through the ears. It came straight to mind. Clear, cold, direct. He doesn't belong to this world. Those words were not just understood. They were felt. And at that moment, everything inside her stopped. Because it was no longer a question. It was no longer just a suspicion. It was the truth, being placed before her, without warning, without preparation. The mind tried to deny it, to search for an alternative explanation, anything that made sense within the reality it knew, but there was no escaping it. The cat slowly turned its head and looked at the entity, without fear, not surprisingly, no reaction, as if he already knew. That presence, as if he had been waiting for that moment. And that's when everything changes, because when two presences recognize each other, without words, without explanations, it means there's a history there, something that began long before that encounter, something that was already underway, long before she could even imagine it. The old woman felt a profound shock, not just from what she was seeing, but from what she was beginning to understand. All the pieces started to fall into place. The disappearances, the stares, dreams. Nothing was random. Nothing was a coincidence. It was all part of something bigger, something that had now reached her. But what was most frightening was not the presence of that entity. It was the realization that perhaps the cat had never been just a cat. What if that's true? So what exactly did she bring into the house? Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when this revelation begins to take shape, it doesn't come alone. It brings with it decisions, consequences, and a hidden truth that completely changes the course of this journey, a truth that concerns not only who he is, but why he is there. And when that why begins to reveal itself, everything becomes even more intense. If you also felt that this moment changed everything, write it down. Now everything has changed. Those words still echoed within her, not as a sound, but as a certainty impossible to ignore. And the more she tried to cling to the reality she knew, the more that reality seemed to crumble before her eyes. Because now it wasn't about a strange cat anymore. It was about something that was far beyond human comprehension. The presence before her approached a few steps, or something that resembled steps, because there wasn't exactly movement as we know it. It was as if the space folded slightly around that entity, as if the rules of that environment were no longer the same. And then, once again, the voice emerged within her mind. He was lost, a long time ago. Lost. That word carried an unexpected weight, because somehow it connected everything. It wasn't just about being different. It was about being out of place, about belonging to something that was beyond that world, beyond that house, beyond what she could touch. The old woman's gaze slowly turned to the cat, and for the first time, she hesitated, not afraid of him, but afraid of what he truly represented. Because if that were true, then every moment of affection, every word spoken, every simple gesture would have happened without her knowing who, or what, was there with her. And yet, nothing inside her said that it was bad. And that's where the situation gets even more complicated. Because when logic clashes with emotion, the decision ceases to be rational, and she becomes human. The entity continued. He is not just a being. He is an access point. Her mind tried to grasp it, but it was difficult. The words seemed simple, but they carried something much greater behind them, a meaning that didn't quite fit into the way we think, an access point, a key, something that connects, that opens, that allows. And at that moment, a realization began to emerge. What if that cat wasn't just an individual, but something that carried a function within itself, something that could alter, influence, or even redefine paths that went far beyond that planet? He can change destinies. This time, it wasn't just a statement, it was a revelation. And that changes everything, because when something has the power to alter destinies, it ceases to be merely important. It becomes essential, dangerous, contested. The organization didn't seem to be in a hurry, but there was a sense of urgency in everything that was being conveyed. Others are looking too. And at that moment, a new layer opened up. That was not an isolated encounter. It was part of something bigger, a search, a silent struggle that had been taking place beyond human sight, but which had now somehow reached her. And the most impactful thing of all, the thing is, without realizing it, she was at the center of it. The elderly woman felt a tightness in her chest, because for the first time, she understood the true weight of the situation. It wasn't just about understanding, it was about deciding. And decisions like that don't come with a manual. They don't come with guarantees. They don't come with enough time to think. The entity finally turned its attention directly to her, not aggressively, but with absolute clarity. He must be taken away. Simple, direct, no room for interpretation, and yet everything inside her endured, because at that moment, it was no longer about what he was. It was about what he had become in her life. Company, presence, meaning, and that cannot be replaced. Don't give up. It cannot be explained. Her mind tried to process the consequences. If that were true, handing over the cat could mean avoiding something bigger, an impact she couldn't even begin to fathom. But don't hand it over. It could have even more profound consequences, perhaps dangerous, perhaps irreversible, and it is precisely here that the journey changes, because until then, she was reacting to events. But now, she had to choose. And choices like that don't just define what happens next, they define who you become from that point on. The house, which had previously seemed small and quiet, now seemed like the center of something immense, as if all roads led to that moment, until that decision. The cat, however, remained there, calm, present, observing, without interfering, as if he knew that it couldn't be decided by him, as if that choice was exclusively hers. And perhaps it was true, because in the end, it's not just about protecting or delivering, it's about trust, in what one sees, or in what one feels, in logic, or in connection, in the explanation, or in what, even without words, seems true. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when a decision carries this level of impact, it doesn't happen in isolation. There are forces behind it, hidden intentions, backstage dealings that haven't yet been revealed, and a hidden truth that could completely change how all of this is being perceived. And when that truth begins to emerge, nothing remains the same anymore. If you also felt conflicted at that moment, write this down. I wouldn't know how to decide. Time seemed to have slowed. Down inside that room, each second carried a different weight, as if the universe itself were awaiting her decision. And in that instant, all that existed was no longer fear nor doubt. It was the connection. Because in the end, it's not the big revelations that define our choices. It's the connections we build in silence. The old woman looked at the cat once more, not as someone facing a mystery, but as someone recognizing something familiar, something that was present when no one else was, something that filled a void that no words could explain. And then, even with trembling hands, she took a step forward. He positioned himself between the entity and the cat, weak, powerless, but decisively. And that changes everything, because at that moment she wasn't facing something unknown. She was defending what for her was real. The presence around seemed to react, not aggressively, but with a subtle shift in intensity, as if that choice had generated a greater impact than expected, as if behind the scenes of that situation something had changed, and then something unexpected happened. The cat moved, but not like before. This time, something was different. He walked slowly to the center of the room and stopped. The surrounding environment began to change. The air grew thicker, more charged. as if an energy that had been hidden until then was beginning to manifest. The light surrounding the entity seemed to flicker, as if reacting to something that was out of control. And then the cat looked at the old woman, but it wasn't the same look anymore. There was depth, but there was also awareness, a consciousness that went beyond. And for the first time, she felt it. He didn't see it. He felt it, as if an invisible connection were established between the two, as if in that instant everything that needed to be understood was conveyed without words, without explanation. It makes no sense, just the truth. And then the transformation began. It wasn't anything explosive. It was subtle but impossible to ignore. The cat's presence expanded, not physically, but in essence, as if what he truly was only being revealed, as if that small, silent form had always been just a part of something much larger, much older, much more powerful. The organization backed down. For the first time, there was a reaction, and that spoke louder than any words, because when something unfamiliar recedes, it means that what is before you is not common. It is not inferior. It's not controllable. The elderly woman, still trying to process everything, realized something that completely changed her perspective. She was never in control of that situation, but also, she was never lost in it, because in some way, she was part of it, not like someone who was dragged into something bigger, but as someone who was chosen, and that perception changes everything, because it transforms fear into purpose, doubt about direction, loneliness in meaning. The entity, still present now, seemed to be analyzing this new reality, as if it were recalculating, reconsidering, observing something that wasn't part of the plan. And then, for the last time, the voice emerged, lower, further away, but still clear. This shouldn't have happened, but it happened, and that could no longer be undone. The environment began to stabilize. The light lost intensity, the sound disappeared, and little by little, that presence began to dissolve, as if it were being pulled back to a place that didn't belong in that world. Before disappearing completely, there was one last exchange of glances. Keep the institution and the elderly woman away, but between the entity and the cat, as if something had been understood, as if something had been accepted, and then everything went silent again. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It was different. It was a silence that carried meaning. The old woman stood still for a few seconds, trying to comprehend what had just happened, trying to fit it into some logic and some explanation, some narrative that would make sense. But some experiences weren't meant to be explained. They were made to be lived. And when she finally looked back at the cat, there it was, small again, silent, as always. But now, nothing was the same, because the truth had already been revealed, even if not completely, even if there were still hidden parts, unexplored layers, answers that had not yet been given, and maybe they never were. But one thing was certain: she was never alone. She was chosen. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when a story reaches this point, it doesn't end. It expands. There are consequences, developments, impacts that go far beyond that moment, and a hidden truth that continues to reveal itself behind the scenes of this journey. And perhaps what happened there is just the beginning. If you also felt that this story stirred something inside you, write it down. Nothing is a coincidence. And after all that, if you've made it this far, it's because this story touched you in some way. Perhaps it's the emotion, perhaps the mystery, or perhaps because deep down, you felt that there's something beyond what we usually see in our daily lives. And it's precisely this kind of reflection, journey, and revelation that I want to continue sharing here. If it makes sense for you to continue exploring this type of story, with more depth, more impact, and more hidden truths being revealed, you can subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss the next narratives that may in some way further challenge your perception. And so I know you stayed with me until the end. Leave this phrase in the comments: I went all the way. This helps create a connection between those who truly immerse themselves in these stories. And it also shows me that this type of content is meaningful to you. If at any point in this story you felt something different, curiosity, tension, identification, leave a like. It's a simple way to show that this connection happened, and that it's worth continuing. And there's a video over here that complements all of this in an even deeper way. Click on it and continue reading. Maybe the next story will answer something that's been on your mind.